Okay, time for another round of the Penn State Blitz here on PennLive. Greg Pickle, hope you had a good Memorial Day.
It was eventful. Yes.
We have some interesting news to talk about with some quarterbacks, some recruits. We're going to get into maybe some of James Franklin's most important acquisitions since he's been there. But first down, let's talk about two Penn State quarterbacks, Greg. One is the current quarterback,
right,
Trace McSorley. The other is going to be Christian Hackenberg a little bit later. But Trace McSorley, I mean, it just, everything is kind of trending up for him after two really productive years as a starter for Penn State. And a lot of people have kind of caught on to the fact that this guy not only is a true Heisman contender, you know, in many ways he could be a tough guy to beat out this year.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, CBS names him their top returning quarterback in the 2018 college football season. I guess it's not too much of a surprise. You do have some very good names around the country that are coming back, but for the most part, the landscape is pretty unproven, and Trace is anything but unproven at this point in time. Obviously, he's been really the rock for Penn State's offense besides Saquon Barkley for the last 2 years, and I think that at the end of the day, Bob, he has a lot of pressure on him to continue the success that Penn State's had without Joe Moorhead, without Saquon, without Mike Gesicki, Deshaun Hamilton. The question I think a lot of people are going to have is how is he going to be able to do it? I think that he's the kind of guy that doesn't really worry about much, doesn't let too much get to him, and at the end of the day, that's going to be what helps carry him and Penn State's offense to similar numbers again this year.
Yeah, you just look what I always point out these numbers. You look at what he did in high school. 55-5 as a starter. In high school, 22-5, I believe, as a starter at Penn State. And 4 of those losses, of those 5 losses, they could have easily won. You talk about the Rose Bowl, Ohio State, Michigan State, the Pitt game. They were all winnable games for Penn State. You're talking about, you know, really, he keeps them in every game, except for the Michigan game in 2016. And you just wonder, it might be a good thing that maybe the focus is more on him. I think he's a guy that's really comfortable, you know, kind of taking the bull by the horns. He's got a good receiver coming back in Juwan Johnson. I think they feel good about Miles Sanders, but and the one thing people kind of overlook is what he can do with his legs. Not only just scoring, he's a tough, hard-nosed kid, but he can extend plays, and I think that really helps him make some plays down the field.
Yeah, there's no question about it, Bob. I mean, this is a guy that's done a little bit of everything and really has done whatever's been needed to carry Penn State to double-digit wins the last 2 years, so we'll see. But the praise and hype train keeps rolling for him.
Yeah, and now we're going to talk a little bit about a former Penn State quarterback, Christian Hackenberg. The news is not good. I just remember back to that bowl game against Georgia, his last game at Penn State. He got hurt early in the first half of that game against Georgia, and that was really when we first saw Trace McSorley. Trace played really well in the second half, but really that was the last time Christian Hackenberg actually played in a game. That was in the Tax-Slayer Bowl. Second-round pick of the Jets. A lot of people thought it was early. 2 redshirt seasons, and they basically just gave him away to the Oakland Raiders for a conditional 7th-round pick.
Right.
I mean, are you surprised just how far he's fallen?
No, not particularly. I mean, I think that a lot of people knew that there would be challenges when he got into the system up there in New York, and that there'd be times when he was going to have to either not show up or get out, but essentially really show more than he did during the end of his high school career, his college career, and then also at the start of the summer camp and the drills and all that when he got to New York. So, no, not particularly. I think that you could tell the Jets got increasingly agitated, I think, with him and his lack of progress, and I think he got a little bit agitated by the fact that he didn't feel that maybe they were giving him the fairest shake or the best shot to be successful. So then you get John Gruden, who, of course, loved him coming out of college and could not say enough nice things and good things about him. I believe the quote was that he'd be shocked if he wasn't a first-round pick before the NFL draft that year. So, I mean, it makes sense. And for a conditional 7th, I mean, if they don't like what they see, they'll cut him and get the draft pick back. And Connor Cook, E.J. Manuel, I mean, it's not like it's the world's greatest backup quarterback competition behind Derek Carr. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and John Gruden loves every quarterback. That's one of the problems. But to not even get a snap, I know that he didn't play well in the preseason. The talent was there at one point at Penn State, but that was when Bill O'Brien was really kind of calling the shots. He did actually have a very good start under James Franklin. You look at what he did in the Ireland game, and he had some other moments early in 2014, but it just seems like the arrow just kept going down. He got hit a lot. I was always fascinated. What would Joe Moorhead have done
Yeah.
Hackenberg was his quarterback that first year. I think that's a fascinating thing to see how Joe would have maybe could have helped him, but it just seems like this guy needs to play. He's 23 now.
Yeah. Engaged.
He's engaged now, but you just wonder, is this his last stand in Oakland, or will somebody else maybe roll the dice on him, at some point during the season? Because I think he's facing long odds, I think, to stay with the Raiders.
Yeah, there's no question. It always shocked me that Bill never gave him a chance in Houston, but now that he has Deshaun Watson, there's no real reason for that. So I guess we'll see how it all plays out. To me, it's his last stand.
Yeah.
No question about it.
Okay, second down here on the Blitz, Greg. Talk a little point spreads with Penn State. They've established some lines for some of their early games in September, including the opener at home against Appalachian State. But there's also some lines, I believe, they got to go to Pittsburgh in week 2.
Yeah.
They host Ohio State later in September. And what do you make of some of those spreads?
Yeah, I thought the Pitt one, you and I were both shocked, I think, to see Penn State a 14-point favorite over Pitt.
Yeah.
Road trip, I don't know if we know a whole lot about Pitt. I don't think they're supposed to be very good, but at that point in time, Penn State will be in a situation, too, where they have a lot to figure out. So I think that, we'll have to see where things shake out. But to be 14-point favorites in week 2, when you don't know how things are going to be without Saquon and Deshaun and all these guys, plus, not to mention the defense has to replace, 8 starters?
Yeah.
I think it could be a little bit of a tougher road than expected. So that one was high. Was not shocked that they were an underdog against Ohio State, even at home. You look at the other game then, Wisconsin are a favorite. I think that makes sense later in the season. But that could be a tough out. Then they're dogs at Michigan, too.
What would you make the line for the Ohio State game? When they host them, it's going to be a whiteout game, very likely at night.
Yeah.
How do you see that game?
Assuming everything goes as planned, I know it went up a little bit, went up to about 2.5, I think. Ohio State favored by 2.5, opened at 1.5. I could honestly see it as a pick by the time that game rolls around. I think you'll have enough money come in on Penn State to maybe move that line down come the last week of September.
Yeah.
But we've talked about it. It is not an easy stretch for Penn State in the first month of the season, Bob. I think you've made point to that it could be the toughest stretch they've had in quite some time, and certainly the Franklin era.
Yeah, and you look at just the series itself has really, the Penn State-Ohio State game has really become, those last 2 games have been 2 of the best games played in the regular season the last 2 years, with the Penn State unlikely rally on the blocked field goal, and then last year's game where Penn State couldn't hold, I believe it was a 15 or 18-point lead there in the second half, and they just kind of fell apart, lost by 1 point, a game that cost them just about everything.
Right.
So you just wonder, the winner of that game is in great shape, and the loser of that game anymore, it's almost like you play yourselves out of the playoff, I think, if you lose that game.
Agreed. Yeah, there's no question about it. So we'll see how it all shakes out in the end, but I do think that game could be closer to a pick. And then the rest of them are tough. You can say about being a 4.5-point favorite over Wisconsin now, but by the time we get to that game, Bob, any number of things could be in play.
Okay, third down here on the Blitz. Did a little something over the weekend, Greg, on maybe some of James Franklin's most important acquisitions since he's been here. I think it's a debatable list, maybe from 10 to 3, but I think the first 2 are pretty easy. But just I think it's a very interesting list, and you look at some of the players, especially that have not played yet. I think that have a chance to be on this list. Anything strike your fancy about maybe some of the acquisitions James has been able to bring to Penn State?
Yeah, from the coaching standpoint, it'd be easy to pick Moorhead, but I'm still convinced, Jalen Slater is a big deal. I mean, he's a guy that will keep them invested in the prime talent in Florida for years to come on the recruiting trail. The new running backs coach, of course. I mean, this is a guy that, Bob, he can just recruit with the best of them. He can get you involved in battles you had no business being in. He can keep you in battles you had no business being in. I think it's a really big deal when you talk about the more recent coaching staff change and all of that. And then in the acquisition front when it comes to the players, when's the last time Penn State went back-to-back #1 running back in the country? I mean, now look, we still got time. Devin Ford is not signed on the dotted line yet. Ricky Slade's going to arrive at the end of June before we know it. And then Devin Ford does not seem like a guy who's going to look around for any reason. So to me, I think that he will sign with Penn State in December, and then you're talking about Penn State acquiring the top running backs in the country in back-to-back years. Yeah,
Brandon Smith, the linebacker, a unique position, a unique player. I put him on my list. I also, obviously, Micah Parsons is a player that I think is going to play very well at Penn State if he can stay healthy. The guy I think that has a chance to really make an impact is Justin Shorter. because they have a need at wide receiver.
Yeah.
I think still at Penn State this year, and he is. I think. Would you agree that he is by far, in terms of talent, the most talented wideout that James was able to land at Penn State?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when Juwan Johnson was coming out of high school, he had a lot of similar characteristics. I think he was probably a little bit more under the radar, though. I think everyone knows how good Justin Shorter is. You've seen him shoot up the recruiting rankings as his high school career continued, and then eventually. I mean, you watch the guy run track. I mean, it's not fair. He's 6'4", 225. And he's running the 4x100 for his team at the Penn Relays, and he's just blowing away guys that were, among the best in Pennsylvania and other surrounding states. It wasn't even really a competition. So he puts it all together, an incredible mixture of speed and size and everything else. So, yeah, we'll see. But to me, I'd agree with that 100%.
Yeah, Justin Shorter, to me, is a guy that I'll definitely be watching in August, and I think if he shows what he's capable of and what he can truly do, I think they're going to have to play him this year, and I think he can help that offense. A question for you just on the acquisition front. If Trace McSorley has another big year, I'm not saying he has to win the Heisman, but he delivers another McSorley-like year from 2016 and also in 2017. In your mind, is he maybe James's best? Would he overtake, say, Saquon Barkley, or has he already?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I mean, I think with Saquon, everyone knows how good he was, how good he is, and will continue to be with the New York Giants. But he's really obviously didn't hit all the marks that he had hoped to hit at Penn State. He wanted to be in the Heisman race. He never really was. Has he overtaken Saquon? I don't know. It's a fair question. Trace has led and been the key reason in many Penn State wins, as was Barkley. Yeah, with this extra year, of course, I think there's no question he has a chance to overtake him in terms of the number of things that he helped Penn State do. And then with Barkley, of course, he has all the intangibles off the field as well that'll help in recruiting and things like that when you're talking about pro development. So, yeah, it's a close call for sure.
Okay, and finally, fourth down here on the Penn State Blitz. I don't know if we have any questions or comments, but
we got a few rolling.
We're talking about the most recent recruiting class. Under the radar signees, we talked a lot about Micah, and we talked a lot about some other players, Justin Shorter, Ricky Slade. In your mind, is there a guy that's maybe not quite, he's not on campus yet, or he just enrolled, in the last month or so? Is there a player or two that you think is under the radar that could really help Penn State this year in this class?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to envision P.J. Mustipher not being a guy that plays from day one. He was a multi-time state champion as a heavyweight wrestler. He looks, I mean, the photos that he shared of his Penn State arrival for the first summer semester a couple weeks ago looked like a guy that with 2 or 3 months of Dwight Galt's training and, of course, a summer camp, he might not play every down, Bob, but he looks like a guy that could really give Penn State a nice little punch in the depth department at defensive tackle from day one. So he's one guy that you watch closely. And I'm still, and this is one of the questions, we'll get into it more in overtime, but tight end. How are one of those two guys not going to be asked to play this year? I know Zach Kuntz is a little bit on the skinnier side, and most figure he's going to need a year to bulk up to play in the Big Ten. But if Freiermuth is ready to go, I have a hard time envisioning him not being able to overtake or at least earn snaps away from what's currently on the roster. I mean, I know Danny Dalton's been sort of the leader of the pack so far, and John Holland and Nick Bowers have been fighting through some injuries, but Bob, it looks to me like one of those guys could play right away too.
Yeah, and Holland and Bowers are guys that have been injured more than once, so just by default they might have to play Pat Freiermuth or Kuntz. But yeah, I think that's another one. And Jake Pinegar is the kicker. I think they have a real question. James is going to have to decide what he wants to do at that position. I don't know if there is another option on the team other than Blake Gillikin. We heard him talk in spring that he really doesn't want Blake to be overextended. He wants him to focus on punting, and if he has any additional duties, it might be as the kickoff guy. But I think August is going to kind of tell the tale of that. If Pinegar is someone maybe that they can't trust or they're not sure, from what I've seen from Gillikin, just kicking the ball, he's got such a strong leg. He proved that he could get that job done when he was a Georgia prep star. Does Pinegar have a chance to play this year? And if he does not play, and he's not the kicker, is it going to have to be Blake Gillikin?
I don't really see how it could be anything else. I mean, look, Penn State did bring in a large number of walk-on specialists that were willing to pay their way to be involved in this competition. And I think if you're a local guy, and most of them are, and you think that, okay, Coach has been quite clear about the fact that he doesn't want his best specialist doing all three specialist things. So if you can find your way onto the field and you can afford it, you might as well try. Do I think Pinegar is the guy? Yeah, I do. Will he do placements? Will he do field goals? I don't know. Watching Blake Gilligan, like you and I had the chance to in the spring, Bob, I don't know how you don't make him your field goal kicker. I don't. If you don't want him to do all three, have Pinegar do kickoffs. With the new rules with the kickoff, I know James didn't feel ready to talk about it back in the spring, but with the whole you can call fair catch anywhere and get the ball to 25 and this, that, and the other thing, I mean, they might almost become moot. So as long as he can get it down there, I mean, I know you'll have some guys you have to worry about placing the ball away from and all that, but the way the new rules are going to be, I think you're going to see a lot of guys just fair catch it, take it at the 25, and go from there. So I think if you can get at least that out of him, you're successful, and I think they'll be able to.
Yeah, and there is a precedent at Penn State for a guy being a punter and a place kicker. In 2011, Anthony Farah did that, and he did a pretty good job. He eventually opted, I think, to transfer, I believe it was to Texas for his final year, but he was able to do it and do a competent job. And Penn State might have to revisit that situation because I just didn't see much in the spring from anyone else, and you just don't know what you're going to learn about Jake Pinegar, in a very short time in August. I think they probably want him to be involved, but Blake Gilligan is a talented player, and they're going to be in some close games this year, so you got to go with your best guy there.
No question about it, Bob.
All right, before we get wrapped up here on the Blitz, I think Greg Pickle has either a question, a comment, several questions, several comments, or maybe some questions of his own he wants to ask me. Hopefully they're just football related.
That's right. I mean, the first one is what we sort of talked about a little bit previously. It's at tight end, and what's the concern level at this point? I mean, if 1 is not concerned at all and 10 is drastically concerned, I think I'm probably sitting at about an 8 right now. Look, you have 2 guys in Nick Bowers and John Holland that you don't know if they'll be healthy for summer camp, or if they are, how long they'll stay healthy. And Danny Dalton has not been a picture of health either. So you're probably going to have to rely. I mean, even if all 3 of them are healthy, the lack of experience is so great that they're almost like the true freshmen at this point in terms of actual game reps. So, I mean, it wasn't. You didn't want to take Mike Gesicki off the field, but at the same time, even if you wanted to, you didn't really have a lot of great options to go with him. I mean, nothing against Tom Pancoast, but when you recruit 3- and 4-star guys at a position and the walk-on beats him out for a couple years in a row, something's not working the way you thought it was going to. So it'll give Tommy Stevens some more time as well.
Yeah, and the way that Penn State uses the tight end, like Mike Gesicki didn't really have any interest in blocking.
Right.
And that leads me to believe that either they can go with another receiver. Juwan Johnson is essentially built like a tight end.
Yeah.
And also Tommy Stevens is a guy that I think will find his way onto the field, especially in the red zone, if there's some questions at the tight end position. But if you look at the group overall, you had told me that Pat Frymuth is the guy that might be able to improve the blocking angle from the tight end position. But the rest of those guys don't have really reputations as great blockers. Nick Bowers at one point was thought of that way, but he can't stay healthy. So I think it's a 7 or an 8, and I do think it would. There's a couple ways they could work around that. They could go with another wideout, instead of a tight end, or they could just use Tommy, I think, more on the field. And I think that's what they're probably going to do.
Yeah, I think that when you heard, with talk of Stevens getting a bigger role when he decided to stay at Penn State, there's no question that their health at tight end was certainly in mind. Kevin is curious about Slade and how much he'll cut into Sanders' role, carries numbers this season. I feel like it's a harder question to answer than it maybe seems from the surface. We know what Ricky Slade can do, but he's not on campus yet. And because some guys can be ready to go. We saw how quickly Saquon got ready to go when he finally showed up. It doesn't have to take long at that position. To me, the question is, I think we know about Miles Sanders at this point, Bob, that he's I don't want to say he's game flow dependent, but I go back to the Fiesta Bowl endlessly, and when he knew he was going to get every other series, it's as comfortable as he ever looked. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to be bringing him in and out a lot, is that going to hinder his effectiveness? And then with Slade, I mean, he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's an electric fireball player that can change a game in a heartbeat or possession in a heartbeat. But how many times can he get popped by Big Ten players or this early in his career before he really hits the weight plan to get him going? So I think it's interesting, a question. I don't think Sanders is a guy that will carry as much as Barkley. I do think you'll see Slade. I don't know if it's as much as most think, though.
Yeah, and also they use Trace as a runner. And the options other than them, I don't know if they're ready with Journey Brown yet. Yeah. I don't know how much more seasoning he might need, or maybe how much bigger he needs to get. Mark Allen is a guy that's been at Penn State. This will be his 5th year. I think James trusts him, but he doesn't seem like a guy that's going to really run between the tackles. He is not a big player. And Jonathan Thomas, I don't know if they've moved him back to linebacker again, but he was another guy that you would hear stories. But somebody's got to have to carry the ball. And my question is, if something happens to Miles Sanders, what happens to the running game? Because they're going to need somebody to carry the ball 12 to 15 times a game. It sounds like it can't really be Slade at this point in his career. So I think the health of Miles Sanders is going to be very important at Penn State this fall.
All right, one more. Logan is curious about underrated players that we really like on defense. Anything come to mind?
Well, underrated, to me, I've always liked what Ryan Buchholz can do. I don't know that Kevin Givens, the three techniques, underrated anymore. I just think that he has another level to his game that maybe we're going to see. I'm going to be watching Nick Scott. To me, I think he is a player that can have a season similar to Troy Apke. I think he's athletic enough to do that. I'm not sure about middle linebacker, so I'm just going to take a pass on that. Another one of the players I think that really has a chance to have a big year is Tariq Castro-Fields. I think he is a long corner that even if he doesn't start, because they have John Reed and they have Amani Arawari as the starters, they use a lot of extra corner sets, and I do think if they move Reed in to play slot corner when they go to 5 DBs, I think Tariq Castro-Fields makes a lot of sense outside paired with Amani, and I think he's a player that they really like.
Yeah, I agree with you. Nick Scott would be my pick as well. I think that he's a guy that we've heard so much about, and we've seen him be a guy that plays with some flair and electricity on special teams, but never actually in defense. Bob, it sets up perfectly now for him to slide in and make a big impact as the last line of defense.
All right, that's the last Penn State Blitz here on PennLive for the month of May.
Yes.
When you see us again, it's going to be June, which means we're closer to the start of the season.